So I'm going to start with the monthly roundup. So the first news that we have today is Circle just had their first IPO on New York Stock Exchange. And if you can see, they caused a lot of buzz, considering that the stock rise 200% from 31 IPO until 94. And the last time I checked, right now they're currently at $100 per stock. Yeah. And next up, I think anyone heard of InfoFi? Yeah, it's actually, if you heard of Kaito, right? They're doing this thing where you your social media account, basically it's like attention equals value. So that means you have a lot of smart followers. If you tweet a lot and a tweet gets a lot of engagement, they convert that engagement into points, which rewards you through airdrops, etc., etc. But as of now, currently, we are seeing that all the leaderboards are essentially the same, because people who have engagements can also be placed higher in the leaderboards on place 1 or place 2, place 3. So essentially, it's a game of people who have advantage wins the game. So this is the current narrative right now. And the next one, this one is on OpenSea. So people are joking about this being a bit late, but right now they are currently gearing up for to launch their own tokens. And they actually have a point system where you finish tasks and you claim points, and they are in the form of Voyage to reward loyal users. And this one is also quite recently, Virtuous Protocol and Ethereum.org recently partnered, and they have their first AI agent launch on Ethereum. Right now, if you search the token Iris, it's actually powered by audit agent Nethermind product. I think they are launching this right now, I think. And yeah, so if you're interested, you can search the ticker over there. Oh, and this one is also quite recently as well. Polymarket partnered with X Twitter as their official prediction market. So if you look on the left-hand side, so it's actually powered by XAI as well, where on the chart you can also see what people are thinking when the metric metrics goes up and down. So this is considered a new feature following the partnership. And yeah, this one is also quite recent, tying to the Circle hype as well. We are seeing stablecoin supply 54% growth overall, comparing it to last year, and I think they have reached around 250 billion total value lock. And the one on the left is from DeFi Llama, the one on the right is from Coinbase. And this one is also another something that relates to stable coins. So it's actually happened on Plasma. Plasma is an L1 blockchain specifically built for stablecoin transactions, and they recently have an ICO. But turns out that the ICO is they raised 500 million in 5 minutes, and essentially it gets dominated by whales. So the median deposit is 35K, and as much that someone spent 100K in gas to deposit just 10 million. Yep, I think that's all for the monthly roundup. Now I'm going to pass it to Patrick to share about enabling compliant on-chain privacy. Thank you very much.
What is this for?
I think you can just clip it on your...
And you have a clip? Oh, okay. I'll just use this one. Oh, it's working? Or?
Yeah, it's working.
Hey. Hi, everyone. So I'm Patrick. I work at Oxbow, and I'm going to talk to you about enabling compliant on-chain privacy. So we're building tools for privacy, and basically, first of all, so why does privacy matter? So mostly, I mean, there are a lot of legit use case for privacy. But I guess like the most important one is protection against surveillance, because right now everything we do is being monitored online by both good and bad actors, I guess. But even good actors could change in the future and be replaced by bad actors who could use these surveillance tools against you. So yeah, so it's good to be able to do things privately. And of course, there are all these kind of use cases, also other use cases like private payroll, business confidentiality, private voting, ID management. And most of it has been made easier with everything that is ZK, of course. So the motivation behind this project is basically to prevent developers doing privacy tools from going to jail. So if you're familiar with Tornado Cash, you've probably heard about Alexei, who was sentenced to 5 years in jail in the Netherlands. He's out now, but still, I mean, it was a bit worrying for anyone involved in this industry. And there's also the case of another Tornado Cash developer, Roman, in the US. The case is still ongoing, even though, according to the latest US regulation, they said that developers shouldn't be held accountable for their users. So in theory, the lawsuit should be cancelled, but for now it's still ongoing. And then we still have many terrible legislation in the EU, like they announced a new legislation coming, I think, next year. They will basically ban any kind of anonymous wallet and privacy coins. So we still need to fight both with code and also legislation, like in the EU. Yeah, just 1 minute. If you want to support the fight for those developers who are having troubles like Roman, you can mint an NFT or donate to this website. So yeah, so Privacy Pool. So Privacy Pool is the app I'm working on. So it's based on a paper that was written by Vitalik 1 year ago with Amin Soleimani and a blockchain researcher from Switzerland. It's basically like a Tornado Cash compliant tool 2.0. So a few people know about this, but people at Tornado Cash are working on a compliant tool that allows you to prove that your deposit is not associated with others' addresses. So you can prove basically that you are not a bad actor, basically, or a terrorist, or whatever you call it. So basically, Oxbow is the company behind Privacy Pool, and we manage the approval process of each deposit. So we launched like a couple months ago with a 1 ETH limit, but now we've removed the limit, so you can deposit as many Ethereum as you want. And yeah, so we are basically open, and you can give it a try on privacypool.com. So how does it work exactly? So basically, you deposit an amount of Ethereum, and then you wait for us to approve your transaction. So we basically run some kind of KYT, like know your transaction. So we check that your address is not affiliated with any kind of DeFi hack or other not legitimate addresses or source. So if your address is connected to any kind of bad actors, then the source is rejected, and yeah, only approved deposit can be withdrawn with privacy. And if your deposit gets rejected, you can still exit. It's called rage quit, so you can exit to the same address you deposited from, so without privacy, but you can, of course, get your money out. And contrary to Tornado Cash, you can do partial withdrawal, so that Like if you deposit 1 ETH or 10 ETH or 100 ETH, you can withdraw half of it or whatever amount you want. And even if your deposit gets approved, if later we realize that you are not a good actor, we can still ban you. And in this case, you will only be able to rage quit. You will not be able to withdraw privately. So this is the technology we use is association set provider, which basically allows you to get a proof of association and proof of disassociation, so you can prove that you are not connected to any bad addresses. And yeah, so that's the ASP. So here's what Oxbow, the company, can do. Basically, we can nuke the association set and force all users to rage quit. We can prevent future pool deposits, and we can upgrade the entry point contract. The entry point contract is a new contract that sets the fees and the relay that are being used by the app. What we cannot do is de-anonymize withdrawal, so that once you withdraw, we cannot tell if where the deposit came from, so we cannot screw with you. We cannot freeze or move user funds because the contract is basically not upgradable. The contract where the funds get deposited is privacy pool, that's all, and this one is non-upgradable. So it's like you cannot mess with your funds. And yeah, so the key characteristic is basically non-custodial and permission privacy. Yeah, so there's a little demo. So I don't know if there's Wi-Fi. So I should have told you about that. Okay, no. Yeah. So you can deposit either ETH or USDC. This is the dev version. It's not live yet. It's only ETH for now. So here I deposit, for example, 0.02 Ethereum. I can select the ASP. For now, there's only one ASP. Here is like the fee we collect, and yeah, so you just confirm your deposit with MetaMask. And yeah, that's. Yeah. So we take a small fee so that we don't we can prevent bad actors from depositing too much. They have to pay a fee each time they deposit. And then yeah, so once it's deposited, you can check the status of your deposit. It's either pending, approved, or exited. Exited if you rage quit to your to the same address you deposited. So here's how you withdraw. You just click on the three dots. You put the amount you want to withdraw, and you select the address you want. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Yep. Well, I'm not going to withdraw here, but you get the idea. So when you withdraw, it generates a ZK proof. So you have to wait a few seconds, and then you can confirm, and that's it. Yeah, you can also exit. So this is if you do not want to withdraw to a private address, you can always exit to the same address you deposited from. So yeah, that's so this is not, there's no privacy here. You just withdraw to the same address you deposited from. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, one more thing so everything is open source. All the contracts are open source, and the ASP for now is not open source, but we plan on open sourcing it. So if you want to run your own ASP and allow your own transaction, you will be able to do this also. Right now, Oxbow is a US company, so our ASP follows basically the US legislation. So if the US bans an address or something, we have to follow the US rules. But if you say want to run your own ASP in Malaysia and follow the addresses that are banned in Malaysia, for example, and you could do this. For now, the ASP is still being actively developed, including the UI, so it's not open source, but the goal is to open source everything so that every country can have their own ASP. So yeah, that's privacy pool. Thank you.
Just now you said the fund will be doing KYP, right? So go through a process of know the transaction. When you scan whether the funds is like we call a dark USDT or USDC or this. This process, is it automatic happen on chains or there will be a off-chain scanning process?
Yeah. So the ESP, as I said, is permission. So basically, we have to allow each transaction. So we use automatic scannings, but we can also manually
the scanning will be using the third-party services.
Yeah.
So may it happen off-chain to the scanning?
Yeah, it's off-chain. That's why I said it's important that the ASP eventually will be open source, so that you can run your own ASP if you don't. You can also run like an ASP that is basically Tornado Cash, where you allow everybody. Okay. Once it will be open source, like you will be able to run your own ASP and basically. Yeah. Although it would, although it would kind of defeat the purpose of privacy code. Well, basically, with privacy code, you can get anonymity, but at the same time, your address will not get flagged everywhere, because when you use Tornado Cash, and then you want to use Aave or Uniswap, you cannot do it anymore. So with privacy pool, you get the best of both worlds, because you can keep your anonymity, and at the same time, you can keep using DeFi and also exchange. Because right now, if you want to deposit to an exchange, after using Tornado Cash, you can get banned or something.
So right now, only Ether and USDC is supported? Right
now, only ETH. So this is running on my laptop, so there is USDC. USDC should be coming soon. I mean, technically it's working, but we still need to work on the UI. So.
What in the roadmap, what other tokens will be?
So we plan on supporting many ERC20, including yield bearing, so that you can earn like ICE. Yeah, we also deploy on cross-chain, and business-wise, we also, I think, I'm not sure I'm allowed to say this, but basically we want to sell the service to companies who need privacy for their own.
Something like from one chain deposit and privacy withdraw from another chain?
Sorry?
Means I deposit the ETH from one of the L2 chain, I'm able to withdraw from another chain with difference.
I'm not sure about that, but I don't think so, but maybe.
Are you the founder?
No. No, I'm just working there.
Which chain is it on, right?
Mainnet, Ethereum mainnet, yeah. Has anyone here used Tornado Cash in the past? Actually, you're probably not supposed to say it.
No, it's Tornado Cash.
More question?
Curious about compliance part of it. So, is that a scenario in which, let's say, a hack happened and that particular address has the funds, has hack funds, wallet?
Yeah, so I think right now on the ASP side we use chain analysis, which is not perfect, so we also do some manual checking also. And
my question is there a possibility that if the hacker do it quick enough in terms of transferring to a lot of wallets, that they might get the funds approved?
Yeah, so right.
And get the funds out quick.
Right now there is a 7-day delay when you deposit.
Okay. Yeah, that should be what I
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
And also, if it's too early, then it's not mixed enough, right? Then people can kind of de-anonymize based on transactions that go in and out.
Yeah.
It's a large.
Also, right now, most people deposit only 1 ETH, so if you deposit 100 ETH, then you have to wait a long time.
It's a good problem.
Although, yeah, now we have like, I think yesterday we announced we have 1 million USD of ETH. So, yeah.
For the company is 0x Bob,
Yeah.
the product, right?
Yeah.
How does it sustain itself, like the revenue model?
Yeah, so as I said, we plan to, I don't know if this has been announced already, but basically we want to resell the ASP service to private businesses who need like
Like
privacy
Microsoft,
for,
right?
sorry?
Like they can also just
Yeah, but
But you help them.
yeah. And one of the founders used to work at Berkeley and other big banks, and they were all interested in DeFi, but they all needed both compliance and also pricing, because they don't want to reveal like their investments and stuff. So that's the hope at least.
And is there any plan on how to like add more liquidity? Like, I mean, because when Tornado started, it was kind of the only one.
Yeah.
But now there's a lot. So like, how do you want to like get more
Well,
liquidity?
as it will, I mean, hopefully, if we are a good replacement for Tornado Cash, it will attract more users. And I think most users of Tornado Cash were legit users, except for like, what we want to avoid is having like power users that are criminals, like Tornado Cash. The biggest users were like not good people, and to avoid like having your funds mixed with these people. So yeah.
Let's give a round of applause to Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So right now, we're going to pass it to the main topic, Marcus Khoo. Let's give him a round of applause.
Microphone as well.
Yeah.
I can just use this, it's okay. All right, hi everyone, I'm Marcus. Going to talk a little bit about decentralized science. So just to get a sense of the room beforehand, how many of y'all are like devs, technical people? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many just like in the blockchain investment perspective, DeFi perspective? Raise your hand. Okay, how many academics or involved in academia wanted to be professor? Okay, cool, just for me to get a sense so I can cater what level I'll be giving the talk at. So a bit about my background, and it'll become very apparent why I asked that. My background is in academia specifically. I did civic engagement programming and also looking at the anthropology of universities. So studying how universities have formed historically. I think we have this like common notion that this is the way that knowledge is produced. It's the most efficient way. It's the way all our institutions are built around. But it's actually quite a recent invention, right? Like you used to have these universities that were effectively training church members and church clerics. Then that evolved into the centers of science when government started putting money in, when nations started getting involved in wanting to build a citizenry. And now even here in Malaysia, right? Like you see all of these universities that are built on this international model that is very much an invention of like the 20th century. So I'm really interested in like how knowledge forms and why it forms. And my other side, civic engagement programming, that's basically the university doing volunteer work, partnering with political engagement, journalism, that kind of thing. So all of that is to say that I do not come from a Web3 technical background, and I also do not come from a hard science background, which is a bit strange for someone now working in DeSci. So to give you a sense of why I'm in the space, I'm still very green to Web3. I started working in DeSci right after DevCon of this year, after giving a presentation on knowledge in the age of epistemicide. So basically what that is how has knowledge been eroded in our institutions, specifically what types of knowledge. So thinking about indigenous knowledge, knowledge that has been categorized as not science because of colonial values, that kind of thing. And I gave a talk with the founder of DeSciWorld on how can Web3 be a player in sort of this creation of knowledge. And if we think about like the distributed ledger technology, it's one big archive, right? And so my claim was, because I also did a lot of archival work in my studies, was what if we look to the people doing radical archive studies in the status quo and see what is or is not transferable if we think about the blockchain as an archive. So that's kind of my origin into Web3 and doing this. Right now, I'm interested in working around things like knowledge commons. So what does it mean for knowledge to be a common resource, something that can be shared, reused for the good of all? Thinking about institutional history, transdisciplinary research. So how do we do research that is not just siloed in one field, and also archival practice. So all of that is to say right now, I'm working for DeSciWorld, which is essentially an ecosystem builder within the space. So what does ecosystem builder mean? I think a lot of people like to claim they're ecosystem builder, community builder. We've been in the space for a while, and this was before the big bull run of DeSci that happened earlier this year. There's a lot of just rounding up people for events, like doing a lot of de-siloing work, because a lot of DeSci has tended to be siloed in nature as they focus on very specific research directions. So we were always thinking about what is like the new meta of knowledge production that is happening, what sort of events do we do to bring people together. We also had some early sort of raised projects. We had like a collaboration with Imperial College to do a bunch of like microbe NFTs that was just like a stamp of research for these students. So, but right now, we're doing two big projects that I think are going to be quite important in terms of this ecosystem building. Number one is Bonfires AI. This is a twofold data protocol and agent deployment service. So on one end, we have the knowledge network, which is effectively a way for data that comes in through agents to be stored in a unit of knowledge and then placed on chain. So it solves like pretty simple relevant AI issues like, oh, when you retrieve, where does it come from, right? But now if everything has a record on chain, that becomes traceable. But the other thing that it enables is sort of using AI in a collaborative way. So AI right now is very optimized for sort of single player usage. You have like your chat interface. What it's not that good at doing is sort of group intent passing, looking at shared context, especially one that is like dynamic as interacted with a group. And then giving suggestions on that. So the idea behind Bonfires is it's the agent platform that will be used by groups like research collectives is what we hope. So if you're interested in sort of that distributed compute AI, public AI, let me know. I can send you like the white paper. I think we just did a Spaces 2 days ago because we're launching very soon. The second thing that we're doing, and this is sort of what my main project is we're doing a DeSciWorld fellowship. Essentially what this is it's a 1-year-long program. We framed it as we will pay you to take a university level class with us to sort of talk and discuss about what exactly are we building on a movement level. So a lot of this will be doing shared readings to build context, also engaging in different types of pedagogy. So it's inclusive of both Web3 and also Web2 and Web0 folks who have an independent research project that they're interested to see what DeSci has to offer. So along with that, it's just like an experiment in onboarding, but also an experiment in reflection. Because I think a lot of the bias in Web3 in general is builder-oriented. So you're usually building infrastructure, trying to tweak affordances and incentive behavior, whereas this, I think, is just a space to do a little bit more reflection and build sort of our, what is the DeSci like meta playbook. So yeah, it's a lot of being in between the space and filling in what those gaps are, because unlike I think DeFi, where the stack is a lot clearer because you have like it's borrowing, sharing, assets. Knowledge I think is a much more dynamic ecosystem, and people have different orientations to how they relate to that. So it becomes very tricky, especially when we just want to like make a DAO or make a dApp that addresses DeSci. So this is kind of what we're thinking about, and we hope to produce some reflections, some white papers, some collaborative research experiments based on the experience of the fellowship. So that's me. The rest of this presentation is just going to be briefly what is actually DeSci. One way to think about it is through what are the pain points in academia and linking that to where in the tech stack Web3 can come in. I also go over some like case studies. Some of them are a little outdated, but I think they're good to just see the scope of where people are working in. And then a lot of the current DeSci stuff is like those original models, but with more complexity layered on top and also more money. And then the last thing I'll talk about is just some narratives that I think are going on in the space, as well as I think some bigger questions that we should be asking when it comes to thinking about decentralized science. Okay, so DeSci builds upon the open science movement's call for accessible, transparent, and collaborative research. So open science, I think, really became a thing in the 2000s. This is where, connected to the open source movement as well, people were calling for data sets to be public, methodologies to be public. And it has made a lot of major progress in a lot of ways. So open access publishing was a direct byproduct of open science movement. Open source tooling, especially like a lot of deep academia tools like citation tools and data protocols, those are also as a result of open science. Data sharing is another one. So things like the FAIR standard, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Those came out of open science. There were also legislative and regulatory frameworks that came out of it. So bodies like NIH, NSF in the US, if you get money from them, you have to publish in their open source library after maybe an embargo of X amount of years. EU has also implemented a lot of things, and UNESCO has kind of given this framework of like, what does it mean to think about knowledge as this cultural heritage and human heritage, and what are sort of our obligations for that? So it's done a lot of good work, but the problem is I don't think it's gone far enough, and we're at this point where I think the Web3 stack has a lot of potential to accelerate and reopen where I think a lot of the open source momentum, which was in many ways very grassroots, very siloed in the academic community as it was advocated for, go more public. So yeah, some areas of where's next: science funding, knowledge ownership, infrastructure governance. So these are all kind of like buzzwords in the space as well. You can see why people are like, there's alignment here. What kind of tech can we build? So going over sort of the pillars for those who are maybe not too familiar with how egregious academia can be. I mean, like with DeFi, you hear the stories of like, financial crash, predatory behaviors. What are the analogs in academia? So this is kind of how we are conceptualizing it. A lot of this intersects with one another, but helpful to see where tooling is being built. So number one, funding. Funding is highly, highly centralized. The same big grant-giving organizations are giving money. The same universities are allocating the money, usually the R1 schools, top 20 big research schools, especially in the global north. And the same government agencies are giving the money, usually controlled by same people. So one issue with that, bureaucratic inefficiency. If you ever worked in a lab before, you will notice that most of the science being done is not being done by the dude who runs the lab. It's being done by graduate students, by the PI, and the dude at the top, he's spending maybe up to 50% or more writing grants because it's a highly inefficient system. People burn out all the time because they're like, I'm not doing science, I'm doing grant writing. So that's a huge pain point for a lot of academics, especially in recent times after COVID when we saw this mass exodus of people leaving the job because they're like, it's too much. Also very vulnerable to agenda shifts. So some of it is good, right? Like when COVID was happening, if anyone was doing SARS research, public health, you got funded, easy, carte blanche funding. And it did a lot of good things. So like public health as a new field, I think is very recent and really was spurred by the pandemic. So now people are thinking about how does like epidemiology connect to like the bioscience, connect to like sociological analysis of communities. So that was kind of a product of the agenda, but it can also go the other way, right? So just because there's always a zero-sum game when it comes to funding. You're funding something, you're not funding something else. And especially now, when you see under the Trump administration, they are doing mass cuts across the sciences. They also don't have a very clear definition of their framework for what counts as like what they are claiming DEI research that is not actually useful. So there were some stories going around recently about like, if you use the word woman too many times or ambiguously in your grant proposals, you're not getting funding, which is quite ridiculous considering like, women's health, right? Like you would use the word, even if it maybe isn't as DEI as confined by the administration. So we're seeing very clear instances of this agenda shifting being quite an issue. And this is not even to go into the like defense industry, state industry, where they also have incentives as well. So number two, ownership. Ownership in academia is mainly defined as IP, intellectual property, but this is a very narrow definition of ownership, because if you think about where most of the scientific labor happens, it's in a lot of intangibles. So think about things like conferences, like conversations and sharing, collaboration. This ends up being a lot of invisible labor. Mentorship is another huge example, and it doesn't encompass the whole of what doing science actually means. There's an argument of like, oh, if we have like a tokenized reputation system that can capture that, maybe we can monetize. So that's one possible use case of the Web3 tech, but I think just like IP is very outdated and narrow for the purpose of even beginning to reconceptualize what a fairer system would be. The second thing about ownership is that institutions often own your scientific stuff and not individuals. So what that means is if you go to another institution, your protocols, your data set, your work oftentimes is not super protected and can be used by other people and more so used for the purpose of compensation. So that's a huge issue that we're seeing, not very fair on to the academics. The third, and this is probably like the most egregious example and the one you probably hear about, is publishing. So the way you launch your career and sustain your career as a scientist is you publish in journals or high impact journals, as they like to say here. The model is very predatory. So they run what people like to call a triple revenue model, where especially for these more well-known journals that matter for your academic reputation and things like your citation indexes that determine your promotion, you pay to submit your journal article, and then you have consumers or students or researchers pay to access the journal. And this is all done atop free labor, both by the writers of whatever articles, but also by the reviewers. So if you hear a peer review, this is often a volunteer job, and it's something that is seen as service. And so who is getting the benefit out of all the free labor and the charging up on all these levels is the publishing company. So there was recently a lawsuit on the Big Six, and it's still being deliberated. Effectively, just like they're engaging in monopolistic practice. It's very unfair. I think the profit margins for a lot of these big firms that are doing publishing is between 20 to 40%, which is pretty crazy for what their business model is. Peer review is also, aside from the fact that it's kind of unfair, is kind of broken in a lot of ways. There's this meme in the scientific community where maybe reviewer one of your article like gives you the best feedback ever. You're like, oh, okay, gonna make some edits, gonna make some revisions. But then reviewer two is like, oh, this guy didn't read my paper. And it's very, very common because there's no actual reputation accountability system, especially at such a scale of like knowledge production that we're at today. All of these, I think, kind of lead to what we call the replication crisis you might have heard of, which is most of our scientific findings in papers cannot be reproduced. And that's very concerning for like the validity of science, and people are thinking like, why is this the case? Is it because data is being manipulated later down the line? Is it because we have bad gatekeepers in certain places? So folks in the DeSciWorld are trying to think about who are the actors and gatekeepers we should place in, and how can we not cloud the incentives in a way that seems to have happened today. And then the last thing I'll say is publish or perish, which is research output is it's disproportionately weighed for your success as an academic in a lot of ways. So basically publish or perish is if you are not publishing papers, you're gonna get fired. And not too egregious of a situation in the global north where these universities have a more teaching-oriented focus sometimes, a community building-oriented focus, but very, very bad in places like Malaysia and certain universities that run the international education model. So I won't name the university, but I'll give you a case study. The KPIs for professors is to publish like X amount of high impact journal articles a year. The number was just unfeasible. I think it was like double digits. So you cannot, like you physically cannot do that much. But because of the managerial system of a lot of these universities, the professors have no say. So what do? They engage in behaviors like translating the doctoral and master's dissertations of their students abroad and taking credit as their own. And so there's a massive, I think, academic integrity question that is emerging in the global south with regard to these types of universities that care about research this much. And yeah, it's just, I think, another example of where the incentives are a little haywire. Last two pillars, data. So infrastructure is super fragmented, outdated, and not interoperable. A lot of times you will have professors who are like, oh, the data sets in these like 2 hard disks that are on my shelf, and that's it. Like, oh, maybe they backed it up onto the cloud, which their university provides, but this is not guaranteed at all. The amount of times you have to jury rig like your R code to make 2 databases talk to each other, like that's a lot of lost time, a lot of labor that's involved. The whole infrastructure for data is generally quite suboptimized. 5, and this is sort of an emergent property of all of the things I mentioned above, access. Who can access science, both as a recipient, as a producer, as a player, as a benefactor? It's very, very siloed. So you get things like brain drain, right? People leaving the country for where the capital is concentrated, where the reputation is concentrated. You get things like knowledge marginalization, where certain types of knowledge are consistently disenfranchised because it's not as sexy to fund the research. So this can be in like my field, like humanities and critical theory, which you can make an argument if that's so useful for society today. But it can also mean things like rare disease research, right? Like if you think about what are the most funded pharmaceutical causes, it's like eczema and diabetes, because that's where you can make the money. So thinking about like who is able to participate in knowledge work is something that the DeSci community cares a lot about. So this is the DeSci tech stack. It's just basically the Web3 tech stack. The folks kind of using all of these technologies in various capacities to sort of make their own institutions is not quite the right word, but they're a mix of like mini companies, mini universities, and all sorts of research collectives and everything in between. So I'll give you a couple manifestations to show you just the spectrum of how DeSci is operating. But basically, any of the Web3 tech stack, it's all being used in DeSci in some capacity to address some of the issues. Okay, so this is HairDAO. I don't know if anyone has heard about this. They define themselves as an open source R&D network for hair loss. So you think about all like the whales, right? They have like, a lot of them maybe have like hair loss problems and they're interested in funding that research. So they make a token, put it into a treasury, and now this DAO sole focus is to basically be an incubator for hair loss research. So there's if you're doing hair loss research, maybe you can apply for their fellowship, apply for their grants, you get funded, your data, your experimental protocol, your product gets put into their open source repository or whatever, and then you get hair token as well. What can hair token do? So you can stake the token to get more hair token and cash out, classic DAO stuff. You can upload your treatment log. So basically, HairDAO has a whole line of treatment interventions that are byproduct of their research or of people participating in their product development. And they want citizens to be scientists. And I think this is another big trend in DeSci. How do you enable the normal citizen to participate in science in a rigorous way? So they want you to upload your treatment. Like if you're using their HairDAO shampoo and it's working for you, they have like these protocols for you to upload that, and you can earn more HairDAO hair token. Classic governance token, you get to vote on what research initiatives are funded, and you also get like a 25% discount on all of their products if you are a holder of the token. So yeah, funds research and product development. That's kind of how they frame their spending to date. Generally, I would say this is a pretty common model where you have a DAO that operates on one specific research stack. So you have a lot of this space tends to be in biomedical. Longevity especially is very, very big. So you hear about things like VitaDAO, which I think is based in Singapore, one of the bigger players in the DeSci space. Generally, I think the people with monies to make tokens, they're interested in longevity research. So think about these specific research-oriented networks with governance systems built around them. Okay, so this is amino chain. This is more on addressing the data protocol side of things. So amino chain is a biospecimen sharing protocol. So their goal is thinking about how do we connect biobanks, researchers, and patients. So let me run through the story. Let's say you have like a benign tumor and you go to the doctor and you're like, okay, we need to excise it. You get it excised. Usually what is done is that biosample can be donated into a biobank for further research. And this is where a lot of biomedical research actually comes from. Usually you sign a waiver and then it's done. You will never remember you will never know what happens to it, if it gets used, who owns it, where is it. All of this is invisible information. Usually where it gets stored are sort of siloed and anachronistic biobanks run by universities. So you think about all the med schools within the university system, this is where it's contained. And so the idea of amino chain is, can we create a platform that A, is a better data infrastructure between all of the actors that need to access this data. So think about anywhere from grad students doing research to people who want to you have biosamples for micro trials, to pharma companies, to the actual patient themselves. And can we also maintain a thread of ownership throughout the way? So they actually have decentralized identity and private data sharing enabled through some ZK cryptography that maintains that line of identity for patients. So yeah, it's questions of ownership, also questions of ethicality, right? Getting your bio data just used into the ether and you don't know what it's used for. Maybe it's biosurveillance, doesn't feel good. So these, I think, is scaffolding the possibilities for a better future. Kind of not a counter argument, but just a question to keep in mind is that these only work in, the use case here is mainly in places like the US, where the healthcare infrastructure and the education infrastructure is super siloed and fragmented from one another. And there's an actual need for having some sort of shared data protocol that integrates all of this. It doesn't work for places like Korea, where the universities own the hospitals and the system is very clear. So I think it raises questions of what exactly is the theory of change that DeSci is proposing? Is it really to create a third-party platform that we then sell to these providers? Or maybe was a better move, or maybe a move we should do in tandem, advocating to have the biobanks better staffed and training the staff better, right? So these, I think, are questions that are very active in DeSci Space, and that a tooling perspective gives you one sort of side of the problem, but the problem is also much bigger. Some other examples of this more bioscience data protocol is healthcare professionals and doctors. Usually when you treat a patient, you have very, very specific experiences with that patient, right? So you'll be okay, the doctor's manual will tell me that if you have X, Y, Z symptoms, I will assign this drug. Usually that drug maybe doesn't work first try, but you know based on your experience that, okay, drug B, C, D are options. And so you will do B, C, D, and depending on that personal relationship you have with your patient. The problem is that most of that interpersonal sort of insight is lost forever. It's only in the heads of the doctor. And they're actually sharing this insight in niche conferences on specific conditions, where word of mouth actually is oh, your patient had a very severe case of this. Have you tried whatever? There's no sort of centralized archive system. So one of these projects, I think they're called Medical Watch. They are trying to build a decentralized Wikipedia for these type of insights to be logged and shared. So another example of data protocol for biosciences on a more infrastructural level than a specific research direction. OpSci's goal was to create a web-native science platform. So they are a service provider as well as an open science society. So the service that they provide is data archiving and infrastructure. Right now, it's actually quite difficult to do FAIR standards. So that was that open science standard that I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of barriers to entry to make your things more accessible. One example is you upload your data set onto something called Figshare, which is, I think, one of the main open source data set for academia platforms, but it costs $1,500 to do it. And part of the reason that that happens is because they're I wouldn't say they're gatekeeping, but they've almost monopolized sort of what the infrastructure is to align with your standards in a way that can then be published by journals. So what OpSci does is that they automate it. They're like, we will make your paper align with the FAIR standards because that's the only condition that it gets put into our data archiving infrastructure system. So that's the service. Along with that, they do something called impact certifications. So this is where if your experiment or if your work of research meets certain criteria for being accessible and being used, so using things like altmetrics. So this is thinking about science not just as a function of citation permeation, but also how it's actually used, right? So things like public scholarship, things like is it adopted by research in other labs that maybe is not captured in the citation record. They'll try to put that into a metric form, and then they'll mint impact certificates using like NFTs. What this does is that it creates a record of research projects that can then be used to sort of get more money from grants, from retroactive funding, from impact capitalists. So like now if you're a researcher which has a track record of having a bunch of impact certificates oriented to their data, that becomes an asset in of itself to this sort of subgroup of funders. Yeah, and then the other thing they care about is they want to launch this open science society. So this is thinking about what does it mean to have a community that curates the taste and curates sort of what science is. Community is a big theme in DeSci, but I don't think anyone has quite cracked the code on how to do that. And we can talk more about like what are sort of the structural reasons for that. But people are actively looking. Okay, so I'll end with some big picture observations and some questions I have about the DeSci space that I think are worth considering. So I think big theme is that you have a lot of coordination specificity. So these are the people that frame science as a massive coordination problem, and blockchain is supposedly very good at solving coordination problems with incentives. And they are playing with all like the dials and levers, using funding, governance, tooling, thinking about sharing, reputation. So this category, broadly speaking, encompasses a lot of the research network DAOs, the things that have funding, crowdsourced funding mechanisms, that kind of thing. The second big theme you have is infrastructure development. So these are folks that are much more tooling centered, that are thinking about where is a general space in the science stack that can use an intervention from a data protocol or something like that. So whether it's publishing, whether it's the data itself, infrastructure development tends to follow a model of they're getting their funding mainly from non-Web3 actors. So they're not trying to raise and mint token or crowdsource. Their clients are usually pre-existing institutional partners. And so there's also this like tension between who are you in between, right? Are you, like to some extent we need to collaborate with traditional science actors, but on another hand, there are a lot of people who are like, we can just do it ourselves, we can crowdfund everything, and then Alzheimer's is gonna go away in the next 10 years. The third and sort of emerging part of DeSci, which I think I'm most interested, is thinking about knowledge as an ecosystem. So what is the sort of knowledge that has been systematically excluded, and how can we make our system more dynamic to include? So I think where the most, like to me, my opinion, the big venture funds will disagree with me, of where the most potential for DeSci is actually shifting how we do science philosophically. I think the VC and the community, the coordination specificity models, they still very much exist on the paradigm of like, throw more money at it, throw more volume at it, and we can do more science. And I think there's a space for that, right? Like a lot of good inventions and interventions have come out of capital, but that doesn't necessarily change our relationship to knowledge, right? I think over the last 100 years almost, we've gone through this system where we're commodifying knowledge, where we're making knowledge more and more specialized, and it's, I think, becoming less dynamic in a way that's not very useful to us anymore, right? You think about how many disruptive science interventions we've had in the last 50 years. It's much less in the last, than in the last 100 years, and people are theorizing various reasons why. I think a lot of the new knowledge is actually going to come from unlocking places that have been excluded. So thinking about indigenous land management when it comes to doing climate science, thinking about like citizen science metrics when it comes to doing regenerative agriculture, of people who are already doing the agriculture, right? These feel to me the most sort of promising places that knowledge is already at. It's a question of how do you unlock and integrate. Questions? More funding equals less problems, I think is still an open question. A lot of these fellowships, they're very much just like researchers are hustlers, right? They're always looking for who can fund their next thing. They don't really care if it's Web3 or whatever, as long as they get the grant. What extent does this change certain sort of community incentives? I think that's open. Barriers to buy-in. Academics are some of the most fickle people to work with. On one hand, you know, like you hear the stories of like, oh, department is always fighting on who gets the parking, and they're very petty. But on the other hand, they're like very mission-driven. People become scientists not to make money, usually. They do it because they like science. And if you actually look at the statistics, after COVID, when you had the mass exodus of academics and staff members in universities, that was the first time they followed the recession trend. So usually if there's a recession, academics stay in their job because they're like, the community matters, my mission matters. But after COVID, something was fraying. So I think this raises the question of like, what does it mean to buy in to the job as a knowledge worker? And to what extent do our DeSci communities and DeSci interventions address that? We don't know. Or at least people have different opinions. Communities and belonging, education and research links. In our current model, education and research are very connected, right? You have the undergrads kind of learning the basic curriculum, but then you have the grads and the professors doing research. And there's a very, I think, it's not very optimized, but there's a reciprocal direction of people who are learning, people who are doing the work. To what extent does this exist now in DeSci, where everyone, in some ways, is like a contractor and like a private research actor? How is this going to interact with our educational institutions? This is another open question. New knowledge modes, so thinking about how do we empower transdisciplinary research, empower all those types of research that are excluded, empower sort of less sexy research. Because at the end of the day, you can fund a DAO for a very specific cause, but you're just gambling on if someone has the advocacy and activism and the capital to start that up, right? So is there a more systemic answer to having more inclusive knowledge? The last one is silos. This is something that I think is still happening quite intensely in Web3. The last 50 years have seen intense specialization across academia in general, especially in the hard sciences. And part of what I think is limiting scientific research is that you don't have enough collaboration and interdisciplinary and time to do like the big picture connecting thinking. And so with Web3 now you have like these bespoke research networks for a specific topic. That's also a siloing force. So how can we de-silo and zoom out? I think is another thing that folks are thinking about. Is there a new mode of academic community and research that enables that? We're not too sure. So I think that's the last slide. Yeah, that's DeSci in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions. I'll try to answer any technical questions to the best of my ability. And if not, I'll point you to someone who can answer or to a project that I think illustrates what you might want to know.
You said you wanted to share some narratives.
Yeah, I think these are yeah, it's embedded. So I think the narratives of like that science is a coordination problem is I think it's the biggest narrative right now. Another narrative that I would say exists is there's a lot of the startup narrative that I think is one-to-one in DeSci. So this is not so much of like the coordination narrative, which I think exists within Web3. This is the VC narrative of if we put money into an issue with more granularity, with less regulatory oversight maybe in some ways, we can get yields. And this feels like it has sort of supercharged itself. I'm on stream, so I don't want to say too much of this, but it's sort of supercharged, I think, the way people are advocating for DeSci. And so I think like you look at what DeSci is, the common shill story is in the next 50 years, and this was a literal tweet, in the next 50 years, in the next 10 years, and it was a list of like 30 diseases ranging from Alzheimer's, diabetes, schizophrenia, and they were like, these diseases will be eradicated. And that's like I think a very wild claim to make. And I think like even when we discovered germs, right, like the sort of scientific medical paradigm shift was not that big. So, but I think that's sort of what has been happening in DeSci on one level. I'll share a third narrative with you that I think is more aligned with sort of what the regens in the space are thinking about. And this is this idea of localized knowledge. So part of science in general is a scaling problem, right? Like the reason these publishing systems are kind of being crushed under their own weight of like, can we be good gatekeepers? Can we manage the replication? Can we have enough labor can we compensate the labor that we're built on? It's because there's so much knowledge being produced, right? And so there's a lot of folks thinking about what do localized nodes of research production look like? How can that research be empowered within that locality? And what is the protocol to then transfer it onto a global level? So that's another hope and a narrative that's, I think, emerging. It's definitely the narrative that DeSciWorld is gunning for. We're thinking a lot about with this new bonfires tool. The hope is that local research collectives have this like AI co-researcher that can serve almost as this archiving library protocol that will then be sent on chain. And then if someone wants to do like a similar project or research inquiry, that data can then be extracted. So the example we like to use is we're deploying the protocol in the Galapagos Island where they're doing some sort of like community regeneration connected with sustainability initiative. So the idea is like, oh, maybe they have like a turtle taking protocol, right? You see a turtle, you take a photo, you upload it into the bot with the metadata. Cool. Somewhere in Malaysia wants to do an orangutan protocol, that data can get extracted and cross-applied. Because right now the insight sharing, I would say, is very network-based, but not very tooling supported. So that's the hope. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What do I think? Yeah, I think his criticisms are very valid and very apt. In my opinion, we're definitely overselling the value of how much translation we're going to get, especially in the biomedical space. And I think that's specifically a big deal because that's when you're promising yield, right? That's when you're promising, this is where the VC narrative come in, that you're gonna get the yield that you deserve, that you stake in at like 10x. And I think it's just too uncertain to make that claim now, given how many institutional barriers there are to getting a drug to clinical trial and then getting also it to be societally accepted is a whole different question, and societally implemented, right? Just because you have a vaccine doesn't mean a government's going to want to make that vaccine accessible at like the CVS or Walmart. So there are a lot of like, I think, sociological questions that personally make me a little bit skeptical of at least the scope of how we can deliver on those, especially bioscience promises. That being said though, I do think innovation and yields can occur within like more granular ecosystem. So say Foundation, just like I think a month or two ago, maybe longer, was like 65 million into DeSci, we're gonna do it. Biggest single capital injection into the space. Do I think a couple of those projects will end up being unicorns? Yes, but that's the thing, right? If you're trying to raise tokens to a general community, I think the pitch that they're giving is not come hunt unicorns with us. It's we're going to solve these diseases together. And I think those are two fundamentally different pitches. And which is why I kind of stake my hopes in not the biosciences, although we have like a very accomplished bioimmunologist on the team. But to me, that's where I think the more exciting science is happening, or not exciting, but it's almost like the more safe also isn't quite the right word, but there's more existing substrate to play with to empower people who have been systematically disenfranchised rather than trying to like disrupt the whole system from the stack up. Yeah.
One quick question. So like based on the e-science protocol that you observe, right? So is it too early to tell, or are there like some things that we can learn to? Because I would assume that it's still quite early for it to be a working.
Right.
Especially when you mentioned that we are prone to one of the challenges is narrative change. So like current projects that you see, are there something that we can learn that can be we can adapt, or is this still very too soon?
What do you mean adapt?
For example, say like I'm not sure about the examples. Like let's say you want to decentralize, say publication. So like, are there any like existing examples that you see that might work, or is it all still very startup?
Right. I would say they're startup-y in the sense that there are several data protocols that I look at and I'm like, this is good, we should do it. Usually those tend to be quite contingent on like the founder's connection with institutional actors. And there are a wide variety of reasons why that can go south, why it doesn't scale. So yeah, I think like AminoChain is a good example. They have like quite a few clients as well. The Medical Watch, I think, is another good example. But so I would say like those data protocols make sense. I don't think there's been a publishing protocol that's been successful, which is I think what a lot of people are very interested in. I think there are some starting experiments in governance that actually I'm quite optimistic about. I don't think they're perfect. And I think the reason why they're good actually is because they don't hedge all their bets on being a DAO. These are conservation DAOs essentially. And the way they work is that there's like the classic token stuff, but it's a way to connect citizen scientists, local land stakeholders, institutions, and researchers. And so there's a whole governance network, and they put it on chain. But in reality, the reason why this is good is because they managed to come up with a governance system that can also exist on Web 2 or on Zero Web. And so I think there are some projects there that are very promising, but there are emerging questions of like, what does the Web3 onboarding look like? How can we communicate the delta in a way that is compelling and not just people going like, why don't we just do this on like, why are we issuing a POAP for our citizen science training sessions as opposed to, writing a name on an attendance list and putting it into an Excel sheet, right? Like that's still not as clear to the on-the-ground people as it could be. But I think what's the struggle that those spaces have had is the governance, and to see that governance is the main experimental push is very optimistic. So I give like an example is like in Malaysia, right? I was speaking with a conservationist who was talking about orangutan conservation, and they're like, oh yeah, there's this one NGO who has sole control on the data protocol and how you report to ministry. And basically, if you want any of your conservation stats certified, you have to go through them because it's monopolized. No one is incentivized to do anything else because then you create interpersonal issues. And oftentimes the activists, the land stewards who are working for local, regional advocacy groups or even regional park system and federal, like they rotate. And so if you have interpersonal issues with one, you have interpersonal issues with all. So one thing you can be like is, let's stick a DAO onto it, right? But it's not that simple. So you have to think about what is the preemptive coalition building that needs to happen before you put the tech stack on. And I think, there have been examples where, maybe it's not as toxic as the orangutans in Malaysia, but like there's, for example, Meso Reef DAO, which is a reef in Mexico, the Mexico Bay. They're thinking about these things, and they've made, I think, strides in creating a model that, not perfect, but I think is also moving in the right direction. Yeah.
Any more questions?
this one is more general, like in like decentralized finance, right? We see a lot of people who kind of like use that as a roof for like for scams. I think this is quite general finance. So is it easy to like root out the bad actors in decentralized science per se, or like what have you observed so far?
Yeah.
Or is it just a general question where like funding is much easier maybe in decentralized finance?
Yeah. My general observation is I haven't seen like a pure rug pull situation, I think, where like you can just raise and get out. And I think that tends to be because to set up like some of these big, or not even big, but science DeSci operations, you have to have a degree of institutional investment, right? You have to have certain relationships with universities, with scientists. Takes a bit of goodwill to get them in. They're generally, I think, more skeptical, and they're also like very busy. So if you get them on board, it's quite like there's some natural barriers there. That being said, though, it's a different question of, is this all just a bubble, right? And I don't know yet. I don't think it is. Are some parts more bubbly than others? Definitely. But in terms of like, I think the scale of scams that I think you're thinking about with DeFi doesn't quite exist. So even our product, Bonfires AI, the way it works is that you do a community raise to get a bot, and you basically pay for amount of compute. And the original name, I don't know if I'm supposed to, actually I can say it because it was public at one point, was bot.fun, which was a direct inspiration of pump.fun, right? And so the idea is that, you can like get a community raise on a bot, and then the bot, your bot token can go up by having your bot be used and having its knowledge be kind of used around. The thing is, it costs like I think $400 initial to pay for the compute, right? So you cannot just do a live stream and be like pump the coin with like this sort of data infrastructure. So I think like moments like that create natural barriers for doing the really scammy things. Although I think like there's probably like classic pseudoscience, like pseudoscience probably where the scam come in, right? Where they're like, this is a new drug that's going to change everything. And they don't target scientists. They're directly targeting the people who are vulnerable, right? And saying that it is what it is. Those probably where the scam's coming in.
More questions?
Kind of, if you want to grow the DeSci community in KL, like what are the kinds of people you might want to rope in that anyone could introduce you to? And on the flip side, if you're someone who wants to kind of learn or get involved, like what are things you should read up about or things you should learn?
Yeah, I'll answer the first one. I think open science is a very good start. Those tend to be where the principles all come from. I think they're also like less tainted by the confusion that can occur when you add the tech stack onto it. Talk to professors. I think a lot of my expertise has come from just like being in community with professors. When I was in uni, I was very involved in like labor organizing for academics, and you get a sense of like what their values are. I think that's quite important. Malaysia is very interesting because I think there's a lot of like academic mobilization happening underground, but academics are academics, and they don't tend to mobilize in a way that's outside their institutional politics. But everyone knows, right, that like a lot of our universities are hyper managerial, and they are, it's not producing the best like original knowledge that it could be. Although we have like really fantastic scholars, and so I've been in some circles where they're like, we got to shake up the system, and like, but I don't know what does that mean? Does that mean maybe changing some faculty governance at like your university? Sure, but I think there's also a possibility, right, of like they're looking to be platformed by something else, and could DeSci be that answer? I think it's a strong maybe. So I think academics are honestly, students are a huge pull because students are incentivized to have their research out there, right? And I think honestly, with Malaysia being digital economy, pretty blockchain friendly, it's not a far cry to see the DeSci paradigm be a supplement at least, especially for undergrad research, because what's the opportunity cost and stakes if like, it's not like we're out competing the university, it's just like, oh, we're alternatively platforming undergrad students in XYZ ways. I think we have a lot of great students here too. So those are, I think, folks. Builder's always nice, but I think right now DeSci is facing the game of how do we onboard different types of people. And I think we need to not necessarily move away from tooling, but get people actually using the tooling and do more, I think, in-depth product, right? Research, yeah.
So there's no more questions. Let's give a round of applause to Marcus. So let's have a photo right over there. That's okay.
Let's show no. Okay, we'll show what is this. Oh, the first slide?
Oh, the face.
I don't know where my face is.
I thought it's the.
It's my default blockchain thing. So there's a downside as well. The downside research.
All guys know this.
Thanks, guys. There are still pizzas over there. There are two more boxes. It's almost finished. Two more boxes? No, here. Yeah.
You guys not really. I ate KFC just now.
One more slice, one
Just
more.
one more.
What do you want me to find out?
Oh, it's my favorite flavor too.
I won't die. Maybe I will. Can I have that one?
I think, yeah, that one's good.
Yeah, I don't want to know that.
I just went to Vietnam, right? There's this 4-piece pizza, which is amazing.
I went a few times.
Oh man.
But you know, last time I went, we didn't eat too much.
So good or what?
Remember? Yeah? You remember? We was there.
So good.
No? We got drunk.
Huh? Yeah, we got drunk. What, in 4-piece or by someone else?
Oh no, by someone else.
The risky place in Vietnam, I guess. No, but hey, 4-piece, did you try the cheese pizza and add honey?
Bro,
That's like.
I don't remember the taste because we got so scared. So we eaten.
No, but you tried other stuff other times, right?
I only ate that once, and then
Really?
next time I went, I didn't get
Shit, if you go to Vietnam, you should go to 4-piece pizza. So basically, order cheese. I think they have 2 kinds of cheese. And then you add lots and lots of honey, and you eat it fresh. Oh, it's like, it's not pizza anymore, it's like a pie. It's like, very hot. Even more hot than Malaysia. Like hot and more humid, right? Yeah. I thought Malaysia was bad, but yeah. But Da Nang is actually very nice.